Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Anne-Marie's inaugural lecture. It is fantastic to welcome you all here and to see so many people getting the thematic memo and wearing some pink tonight. Anne-Marie joined York St John back in 2011. Just checking that's right, good. And she was appointed then as a lecturer in American literature. And since then she has contributed hugely to the leadership of the institution as a whole in various roles, culminating in her current role as Head of School of Humanities. Before York St John, she worked at the universities of Central Lancashire, Huddersfield and Sheffield. Anne-Marie has a passion for widening participation and has spent 15 years working as a literature tutor for the Villiers Park Education Trust in Cambridge, which encourages young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to consider going to university. This passion fits very well, of course, with York St John's commitment to social justice. Anne-Marie's research has a focus on American literature, women writers and material culture. She's published across a wide range of subjects, including femoir and celebrity autobiography, 1920s writing and flapper fashion, Mae West, zombies and speculative fiction, and Edith Wharton. She's currently involved in several different research projects, including one exploring the representation of First Ladies in literature and film, and one on innovative approaches to teaching the humanities in post-92 universities. She's edited 3 collections of essays about literature, the most recent being Time, the City and the Literary Imagination, where she contributed a chapter on Colson Whitehead's novels and the concept of safe spaces in African American writing. Tonight's lecture is the culmination of Anne-Marie's various diverse and exciting interests. She will explore some of the key moments in her career, focusing on the idea of voice and how women's voices in particular have often been repressed and silenced. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Anne-Marie Evans for her inaugural.
Thank you so much, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, thank you. Thank you for the back row waving at me as well. I'm truly very honoured and very touched to see so many people here tonight. I want to say a big hello to everybody watching at home, including my mum and dad. Hello. Hi. I hope you've worked the Zoom okay and you can see this. And it feels just really wonderful to be celebrating with everybody here tonight. And I'm going to explain my title. That will hopefully become apparent as we go along. And I'm also going to explain this, so don't worry. there is a reason for everything. But first, I just wanted to start really by framing this and thinking about why this promotion to Professor means a lot to me. And there's kind of 2 reasons that I would like to share with you. If we can get the PowerPoint to move. Hang on 1 second. No. Let's see if we can jiggle. This feels very, this is not the first time giving a lecture in this room. The PowerPoint has not been done for me. Bear with. There we go. Okay. It seems quite obligatory to have a childhood photo in these lectures. So here's me. I'm about 3, I think, in these photos. This is my granddad, John Joseph Farrell, and apparently I was telling him a joke. Clearly I was hilarious. And I wanted to just sort of start with this because my granddad died when I was 11 and I was very, very close to him, and he was a really interesting man. He left school when he was 14. He's from Irish Catholic working class background, and he had to go out and work. He had to go and kind of earn money. And looking back on his life, I really recognise as an adult the signs of a man who had incredible intellectual interests, but for whom access to education was such an obstacle, and he simply did not have the opportunities to learn. And he was a very big reader. He read almost exclusively non-fiction. And he was really interested in America and in American culture. And it's one of those kind of interesting connections for me thinking back, and that's going to be one of the circles that I'm going to attempt to draw in this lecture. But he used to tell me all about American history when I was a little girl, and he used to sort of speak to me like I was like a grown-up, and I'm not sure at age 7 I should have had such a good working knowledge of what the Comanche did with their prisoners. But I did. My mum and dad were finding this out for the first time live tonight on Zoom. So he read all of this history books, and he was so sympathetic to the Native American cause, which I think is quite interesting in terms of, you know, coming from his position. He was hugely sympathetic to their kind of background, and he used to tell me all about them, as I said. And I have all of his books in my office, all of his books on Native American writing I have in my office, and I have actually used them in lectures, and I've kind of passed them round and shared them with students and things like that. So I like that idea of you know, me sort of, you know, decades later reconnecting back to him through my research. So the second reason that this kind of family background is important to me is that his mother, my great-grandmother, was illiterate. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, and she sold apples in Phoenix Park in Dublin, which is now the home, in another weird connection, now the home of the American Embassy. But that was her task. She was illiterate. She just, you know, was not able to get to school. My grandmother left school like my granddad did at 14, and my mum wasn't able to go to university until she was in her 50s, and then she went back to the OU and did an OU degree, which was amazing. And I remember her writing essays at the kitchen table, and in those days you wrote everything by hand and posted it off to your tutor. So the only reason really that I'm able to stand here today is that, unlike my great-grandmother, I had access to education. Unlike my grandmother, I was able to stay in education. And unlike my mum, I was able to go to university when I was 18. And that experience changed my life. And I think that's kind of one of the things I want to think about, this idea that education changes lives. I'm always going to be enthusiastic to the point of ridiculousness about education. And if we're not going to be kind of ideologically excited about the idea of education, then what are we all doing here? We have to believe in the message and the power of it, because it is transformational, and we have to remind ourselves of that when the OFS has put another regulation out and there's another metric to look at and there's so many emails we have to get through. We have to remind ourselves that actually it is a huge privilege. I get to talk about books with people as a job. It's absolutely amazing. And I also just want to acknowledge briefly that this lecture has changed since I started writing it, because it was a very jolly, happy lecture, and it's still quite jolly and happy, don't worry. But then we had the election result from the US, which really deeply upset me. And then I rewrote the lecture and it became very, very angry. And I thought, I'm going to have to rein it in, because I'm not going to allow the orange one to take over all of my inaugural moment. So we've had a few shifts about. But the other reason that this is really important to me, as well as that bit of family background, is this quotation from Toni Morrison, who I'm sure many of you know. You know, Pulitzer Prize winning African-American writer, critic, commentator. I just think she's absolutely wonderful. And this quotation from her interview with, of all things, the Oprah magazine, is a really important one, I think, because she talks about this idea of education as a kind of a payback system, actually. She says it's not a candy bag grab. That's what she says in the rest of this quotation. This idea of, if you have freedom, you need to free someone else. If you have power, you need to empower someone else. And I use that really as a kind of North Star in a lot of the way I approach things. And my students, quite a few of whom are here, and I know quite a few are watching at home, will probably recognise that quotation, because I use it in teaching quite a lot, and I find it super, super helpful. And I think that we just have this responsibility as educators to keep reminding ourselves that what we're trying to do is empower people and each other. So I thought I would just very briefly talk about how I got into American literature. And you'll be delighted to hear it was entirely by accident. Because I was book nerd Barbie growing up. I was a kind of obsessive reader. I still am in some ways, and I read very quickly, very soon, and I would discover a writer like Charlotte Bronte. I would read everything Charlotte Bronte had written, then I'd read all her letters, then I'd read all the biographies about her, in a kind of like slightly obsessive, possibly scary way. And I read all the classics as a teenager. I was also completely obsessed with Nancy Drew as a teenager, so I read and read and read and read. And just before I went to university, I got really, really massively into Jane Austen. And I don't know if there were any kind of major cultural moments when I was a teenager that possibly might have influenced me. But when I got to university, I thought that would cheer everybody up. Thank you, Colin. When I got to university, I was utterly obsessed with Jane Austen. Nowadays, just for info, I would choose Captain Wentworth every time from Persuasion over Mr. Darcy, if anybody wants to know. But I was really into the Regency, and I loved Jane Austen. I still love Jane Austen. But I ended up swapping purely by chance onto an American literature module, and I can't even remember why. I think I was cross because they had taken some women off the early modern module I was supposed to do. There was something I got cross. And I moved, and they said the only module that you can do is this American literature one. And I thought, American literature? I think I'd read To Kill a Mockingbird at GCSE, that was it. So they moved me onto this module, and it absolutely kind of changed my life. And I became American Dream Barbie from that point on. And it was just a new world to me. I had never been to America. Nobody in my family had ever been to America. It felt kind of exotic and exciting and other and new in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And I read contemporary Native American literature on that third year module, and I remembered everything that my granddad had told me, and I began to kind of make those connections back. And I've been completely fascinated really by America and American culture for sort of decades now. And I'm really interested in kind of cultural artifacts, possibly you might have worked out. And this kind of is what kind of brings me to Barbie. And I think it's fair to say at the moment that Barbie is having a moment, okay? And I don't know if anybody's been to see the big Barbie exhibition at the Design Museum. I'm dying to see it. I haven't been able to get there, but I'm going to try and get there before it closes in February. Obviously, it's part of the film, but I'm really interested in kind of Barbie as this kind of cultural artifact that seems to mean so many things to so many different people. She is both loved and loathed in equal measure, and I'm always interested in things that get US right-wing worked up. It's always worth paying attention to that. And actually, I've always been quite interested in Barbie before the film. I'm quite interested in dolls. I think they're quite strange, uncanny things. I do not sit at home and play with them, like, don't worry. I'm interested in them in a kind of intellectual way, all right? Just to be clear on that, I'm good. And some of you might remember, if you've been in my office, that I actually have a Barbie in my office, and I've had a Barbie in my office for years, and it's from a doll workshop that we did a few years ago, where you could remake a Barbie, and I made Barbie who is sick of being interrupted by men in public space Barbie. And it was when I was commuting a lot, and I don't know if you've ever been, it usually happens to women, I'm afraid, a woman trying to read a book in public. Very best of luck to you, is all I can say to that. Because I got so many interruptions from men just trying to like engage me in conversation, which I really don't wish to do most of the time anyway. And I don't, but also before you start, I don't know what I was doing with the styling. I don't know why she's got a feather. Clearly I had a vision, but she's been there for a while now alongside my suffragette and Rosie the Riveter. I also have, you didn't see it on the photo, I also have Ursula the Sea Witch. Because I also think she needs representation too. So she's also there. And when I got promoted over the summer, my lovely friends made these posters and put them all over the Eagle and Child, completely without permission. All over the windows. And they have made these badges tonight, which quite a few people on the front row are wearing, and I am also wearing now. And I'm very appreciative of that. Some colleagues in humanities have been known to refer to my office in the quad as Barbie HQ. And I don't mind that. I kind of lead into that. So kind of why Barbie? Why is she something, a kind of artefact, a figure that we're also interested in? Do you know that there are 3 Barbie dolls sold every second across the world? That is a staggering statistic. And I thought what might be quite useful is if I started by thinking about Barbie a bit more, and I thought I would try and tell you maybe 10 things that you might not know about Barbie. So there's going to be some hot facts here. There isn't a test at the end, just so you're aware, you can relax. So here are my top 10 facts about Barbie. So this is the very first Barbie that was modelled. You might remember in the opening scene of the film, it kind of references this with Margot Robbie in the famous black and white swimsuit. She comes out in 1959. She is designed by a woman called Ruth Handler, who was the co-founder with her husband of the Mattel toy company. She sold for $3. And if you think you've got one of these in your attic, hold on to her because she's now worth about $25,000. So well worth holding on to. And of course Barbie is like a huge, huge hit. There was a lot of resistance to the idea of a kind of female doll that you could dress up. She was advertised as a teenage fashion plate when it first came out. And of course it takes off. And there are 300,000 Barbie dolls sold in the very first year. And in 1961, Barbie gets a boyfriend. She gets Ken. Now, I think Ken's had a glow up. He's definitely been to the gym in recent years. And I think most people know that Barbie was named after Ruth Handler's daughter, Barbara. And I don't want to ruin Barbie for everybody, but Ken is named after their son. So we presume that the family got really good therapy. Because I feel for the original Barbie and Ken, that might have been a lot. But here they are in doll form, the original Barbie and Ken. And of course, one of the real problems with Barbie is that she propagates this blonde, blue-eyed image of womanhood and of beauty. And it takes Mattel a good while, but they finally cotton on that, I don't know, maybe there should be some different types of Barbies and maybe we could get a little bit more inclusive. And in 1968, we get Christy. Now, Christy is in the Barbie universe, which, yes, is a thing, but she's not actually a Barbie. But she arrives, you know, during a period of massive civil rights demonstrations and activism in the US, and Mattel's like, oh, maybe there's a market here. So we get Christy, and then eventually, in 1980, we get a black Barbie, and it's designed by this woman, Kitty Black Perkins, who was a fashion designer. And she took the job at Mattel sort of thinking, oh my God, I've got to pay my bills. But she ended up designing clothes for dolls for 30 years and designed a lot of Barbie's key signature looks over the years. And when Black Barbie, and she was literally advertised as that, was first arrived on the scene, she had the tagline, I don't know if you can see it, it says, she's black, she's beautiful, she's dynamite. So this was the first bit of diversity. And we also see at a period when women's rights were well into the full swing of second wave feminism, we also see Barbie getting a career. And she's a very busy person because she's had over 250 careers. Her first career was that she was an air stewardess for American Airlines, obviously. And about 3 years later, she became a surgeon. I'm not sure that female surgeons in the 70s wore their outfits quite like mini skirts, but sure, you know, you do you, Barbie. She's also, very interestingly, run in nearly every US election. This is the 2012 one, some other guy got in 2012. But she often runs for president, not this year, which I thought was interesting. And she also got her first dream house in 1962, when actually, when you look at the historical records, there were hardly any single women owning houses, but Barbie, she was in there, she got a dream house, good on her. And the other thing that we have to remember about Barbie is that it's completely insane. She's completely anatomically impossible. If Barbie was a real woman, she would have to walk on all fours. Like, she couldn't physically stand up because her legs are so skinny, her chest is so large, and her waist is so tiny. So she would just collapse in a kind of puddle of goo, one presumes. And Barbie, Mattel, kind of, I don't know, decades later, in 2016 are like, do you know what, maybe we should change it, guys. And then we had the advent of curvy Barbie. And if you translate Barbie's vital statistics, and if you translate curvy Barbie's vital statistics, curvy Barbie is somewhere between a size 8 and a size 10 in UK female dress sizes. So that's probably the size of like one of my legs. So it doesn't feel that inclusive or that curvy, to be perfectly honest. But we also had tall Barbie, petite Barbie, and original Barbie. So they make some efforts, and there are some curvy Barbies represented here. And curvy Barbie didn't fit onto the doll stand that I bought for the Barbies, which also felt a little bit like the story of my life. And you have to buy special clothes for her because, of course, you do. And of course, the other thing to remind ourselves about this is that Barbie is really controversial, partly because of these impossible body standards. And actually, the famous Women's Strike for Equality, the big marches through New York and DC in 1970, many of the women were chanting, "I am not your Barbie, I am not a Barbie doll." So Barbie was seen as the kind of the opposite of the feminist movement at the time. In 2013, Berlin decided as a kind of tourist attraction to build a life-size Barbie dream house. I probably would have loved it, I'm not going to lie. I would have Instagrammed the hell out of that. And it had a massive fountain in the front in the shape of a pink shoe. But there were loads and loads of opposition to this, and there was a load of topless activists who stormed the dream house. This is true. And if you're wondering what this lady's burning, she's crucified Barbie and set fire to her. Which felt a bit much. It just felt a strongly worded letter, like, But, that was how Berlin feminism at the time rolled. Okay, so that's what happened there. We also see in very, very recent years, in literally 2022, we see Barbie getting finally a bit more diverse. There's actually been a Barbie who is a wheelchair user since 1997, but more recently we also have Barbie and Kens who might have hearing aids, might use a walking stick, might have a visible disability, in other words. Barbie now has over 17 skin colours, and is, making an attempt to be more inclusive and move away from that kind of blonde, blue-eyed, domineering image of Barbie. The other thing that Barbie likes to do, and brace yourself because this is weird, Barbie likes to pay tribute to people. I was, 3 days ago, I did not know there was a Maya Angelou tribute Barbie. But there is. I'm not sure how she would have felt about it. Does anyone recognise who this Barbie might be? Any guesses? It is Mariah Carey. She'll set you back about £80 if you want to buy her. Christmas coming up, you need an idea. She is a highly collectible Barbie. We've obviously got Marilyn Monroe, who is quite obvious there. This one, I nearly fell off my office seat when I discovered Civil War nursing Barbie. Now, I've got some problems with Civil War nursing Barbie. As I'm sure you know, US Civil War runs 1861 to 65. There were very few female nurses. The ones that were nurses were nuns. They did not have a jolly blue and white striped dress. They did not wear outfits. And the thing that I find amazing about this, because I got hold of the image of the back of the box, because I was like, are you north or south, Barbie? Because that's kind of crucial. But actually, we don't know with this Barbie if she's there for the North and the Northern Union soldiers fighting against slavery, or the Southern Confederacy who are fighting to keep it. Way to keep your marketing open, though, Mattel. Really great, Some might say a bold campaign. And in the info on the back of the box, Barbie, wait for it, Civil War nursing Barbie is going to help at the Battle of Gettysburg. I kid you not. And if you don't know, the Battle of Gettysburg was the most bloody battle in the whole of the Civil War in the US. So I was like, no, Barbie, run away. Don't go there. You're not going to like it. It's very far from the dream house. I find this kind of strange and weird and interesting. I might have to write something about Civil War Barbie doll, because I think I'm like quite obsessed with her now. The other thing that's worth reminding us all about here is, of course, that pink is a really political colour, and thank you to all of you who came out in your pink this evening, and that's because I really think we need to reclaim it. It has been a colour that has been associated with a kind of idea of a kind of ditzy female bimbo, partly because of Barbie, because of things like the signature pink collection. I love pink, as I think many of you know, and this is probably the 4th pink blazer in my wardrobe, and I enjoy wearing pink. And Margot Robbie, had an immaculate fashion stylist for the Barbie press tour. She recreated vintage Barbie outfits whilst wearing couture, nearly all pink. And of course, when we had the current president-elect was elected for the first time, we had the Women's March on Washington. So I think it's really important to kind of reclaim pink. Historically, pink wasn't associated with women and gender until post-World War II, when again, companies and corporate groups begin to realise that the housewife is a really important demographic for consumerism in the US, and they begin to kind of gender colour. Historically, pink was associated with youth, not with being female. So I think that there's a certain political kind of reading that goes with wearing pink. And I have had so many texts from people today going, I'm wearing this, is that okay? And I'm like, yes, wear what you want, it's not a condition of entry. But I think it's really interesting about the way that you kind of open yourself up to a political reading, male or female actually, if you are wearing pink. So something to think about. And also, the kind of final thing I should point out here is that probably you already know this, but playing with dolls is really good for you. Mattel is very good at paying for lots and lots of very important research into kids' development. Hilariously, a lot of it is carried out at the University of Cardiff. And let me tell you, their impact case studies must be amazing, because their research is on the Mattel website, and they've done all of these huge studies into child development. And playing with dolls is great with kids. Great for kids. It develops empathy. It's great for kids who might be neurodivergent. It's really, really positive in terms of developing social skills. So we also have in the Barbie universe what I have dubbed here Margot Robbie as Barbie. Because after the film, the universe expanded so that we now have dolls of the actors in the film playing the dolls. So I feel, if I have to give a lecture on postmodernism anytime soon, I've got my entire material right there, because we're in this kind of weird kind of meta loop, which I think is really interesting. And when I was prepping for this, I was also trying to see if there was a Professor Barbie. I was like, there must be Professor Barbie. She's been like every kind of Olympic sport champion. Surely she has done some learning. Not quite. But we do have an actual Professor Barbie. This is Professor Sarah Gilbert from the University of Oxford, who was really important in helping to develop the COVID vaccine. And as a kind of tribute to her work, Mattel dedicated a Barbie to her. And I'm not sure from this photo if she's pleased or not. I think it could go either way. Just for the record, I would love it. I would love it. I would be like, could there be different outfits? But I'm not sure Professor Gilbert is enamoured of her Barbie, alas. So how do we kind of read and understand Barbie then? How can we begin to kind of understand her as a figure? She's got this fascinating, if completely bonkers history. She can apparently do anything, so how can we decode her? And for me, thinking about kind of what Barbie can and cannot do, it's really all about voice, because we can't forget that Barbie, as a doll, of course, as this figure, is completely voiceless. Now, as a literary critic, I tend to think about voice in quite specific ways. It's a technical part of writing. I think about the idea of voice and what that means. I think about the narrative voice of the text. I think about how the author has created that voice. What's the tone? What's the style? What does that mean? How we tell our stories is just as important as the stories that we tell. So we're all really, obviously shaped by language. We need to understand it. We quite often tell our postgraduate researchers here to kind of find your voice And I remember years ago, not long after I first started working at York St John, I was supervising a third year student's dissertation, and she was writing about the female Beats. Now, the Beats, as some of you will know, was a big movement in the US, big literary movement, and it was a lot of men stealing cars and writing books about that and doing quite a lot of drugs. I'm being quite facetious here, and I know there are big fans of Kerouac here who will want to tell me off afterwards, and that's fine. But the women in that movement, the wives and the girlfriends, got really missed out of literary history, and this female student wanted to go back and look at all of their autobiographies and write about them, and it was brilliant. It was a great project, and I really enjoyed working with her. And when she handed her dissertation in, she had dedicated part of it to me, and she said, thank you to my supervisor, Anne-Marie, thank you for helping me find my voice. And that meant an incredible lot to me. I actually photocopied the page and I had it pinned on a notice board in my office for ages, because I thought, you know what, that's it. That is what I'm here to do. That is what Toni Morrison is saying. That is a big part of my job, is helping people to find their voice and to use their voice and to raise their voice. And again, this brings me back to Barbie, because what's interesting about Barbie is that we project meaning onto her. You know, we choose which Barbie we want, and goodness knows there's an awful lot of Barbies to choose from. But you restyle her, sometimes you give her haircuts that go incredibly wrong. You know, we become the authors of Barbie. When kids play with dolls, they do all the voices. You know, this is what happens. It's all imaginative role play. So we become the authors, the curators, if you like, of our Barbies. And there's been some really kind of quite interesting research on this. This is Kim Toffoletto. I was deliberately looking for research that didn't address the film, that predates the film, because obviously there's been an explosion of scholarship about the film. And I think what Toffoletto says here about Barbie as this kind of slightly post-human figure is really interesting. Barbie has limitless possibilities. Women in the real world do not. And of course, that is one of the ideas that the film attempts to play with. I also think it's quite interesting that the movie is a kind of quest narrative. Barbie is trying to find her identity or find her voice. And I think quite a lot about how women's voices are often ignored. And before the results of the US election, I was thinking about how to write this lecture and thinking about the importance of speaking up. And then I was thinking, well, yeah, that's one thing, isn't it? But you've got to speak up, and then someone has to listen. That's the other part of that's where meaning is made. Someone has to listen to what you have to say. And I think there's really interesting ways where women have tried to encourage and amplify each other. And an example that I was using at another event recently, and some of you were at it, so you've heard this before, so apologies, is when Obama got into power. It was all brilliant, it was great, but he had a very male-dominated workforce. He had a lot of men on staff, and the women found that they were often being talked over in meetings. They were having, have you heard about heap eating? When a woman says an idea in a meeting and then a man repeats it and someone goes, oh, brilliant, great idea, John. And in Obama's government, the women decided that they were going to tackle this at grassroots level. So whenever one of them said something that was really great, one of them immediately repeated and went, brilliant idea, Claire, thank you, let's think about that. And it worked. And they did this kind of amplifying thing that I thought was really kind of interesting and useful. And of course the New York Times has done many cartoons on this subject. And I think it's really important for us to remember that sometimes women's voices are simply not heard. We're talking, we're speaking our truth, but we're not always given the space for those voices to resonate. And I think about a lot in these past few months how we have seen extraordinary acts of courage from women. At least 26 different women have accused the president-elect of all manner of sexual misconduct, including sexual assault. And I think about the courage it must have taken them to speak out, knowing the reception that they would receive. And now the knowledge that 55% of American men have voted their abuser into power again. I had better not have to read any more hot takes about how feminism's gone too far, let me tell you. I also think about the courage and the dignity of Gisèle Pellicot in France, who waived her right to anonymity in her rape trial and faced the 50 men who assaulted her after her husband sedated her for years. I think about how her her assaulters, the men who attacked her and assaulted her, I think about how they hid their faces in court and from the cameras. And I think about how loud we have to shout sometimes as women to make our voices heard, and that even when we shout, people don't always listen and they don't always take note of what we're saying. And that brings me back, perhaps unsurprisingly, to the Barbie movie. Here it is. Has everyone seen it? Or at least, yeah, everyone's like, yeah, of course we have, yeah. This was a movie that I thought was really interesting because it made people so mad. It made people so angry. I went to see it in York and a man walked out. And this happened all over the place. I just thought he'd maybe gone to get another drink. No, he was gone. And then, you know, I was talking about this with colleagues and I was like, why did we think for a moment that men would vote for Kamala? They couldn't even cope with the Barbie movie. They couldn't even cope with that. And the movie, I think, is interesting because it was advertised as having this kind of strong feminist message, but it's all wrapped up in kind of camp nostalgia and pink. And it's basically a film, as I'm sure we know, about an existential crisis. And I find it really interesting that it was billed as a feminist film because I think it's a bit hit and miss in its politics, and that's okay because art cannot answer everything for everyone, so that's okay, I get that. The Guardian called it a muddled feminist fantasy, which I felt was probably fairly accurate. I also take note that I am not the demographic for the Barbie movie. I have read a lot of feminism. I give lots of lectures about feminism. I talk about feminism. I'm kind of a feminist. But if I were a trad wife in Iowa, God forbid, I'm not sure that lifestyle would suit me. But that movie might have had a much bigger impact on me. It might have forced me to confront some ideas about myself and my life that perhaps I wasn't ready to confront. And of course, if you've seen the movie, you'll know that the bit that really got men angry, and when I say really angry in the US, I mean they were YouTubers burning Barbies on camera. And again, I just hope they're okay. You know, maybe find another way to self-validate. But this is the famous speech from America Ferrera's character, and there was a lot of kind of interesting stuff about how, you know, she filmed it over 2 days, she had to give the speech like 50 times, she got an Oscar nomination. The irony of Ken getting an Oscar nom and not Barbie, by the way, is not lost on me. But this is feminism like 101, right? The idea that being a woman might be complex, might be complicated, surely shouldn't be shocking in 2024 or 2023. But it really upset the American right. In a way that I think only Taylor Swift and her existence has rivaled, because Taylor Swift also really upsets the American right. And I think with Barbie, it's because they just really want to keep her in the dream house. They just really want her to stay there. And how can a doll possibly generate this type of hate? And this is where I think we go back to Toffeletti and those ideas about the kind of the post-human, because Barbie clearly isn't being read as a doll in this movie, she's being read as a woman. And for right-wing commentators, she quite literally is a problem because she will not get back in the box, right? And I did enjoy how they did that in the movie, I thought that was fun. So that makes me think about the Barbie movie, and if we can kind of read the movie as a kind of every woman's autobiography, are we looking in terms of American literature, are we looking at like basic myth literature here about the kind of the genesis of this character? It's a kind of quest narrative as well, isn't it? So I also think, I was trying to think about other ways in which this movie really annoyed people. I also think there's something really interesting about women being funny. And sometimes people, often men, get very annoyed by women who are funny and who are successful. And I think this was a kind of great kind of break of the reel into the movie when Barbie's like, do you guys ever think about dying when they're all dancing to Dua Lipa? I often think about dying when I'm dancing to Dua Lipa. And I think there's a really kind of long history, particularly in the US, of women who are funny and who use their voices in a very particular way, being seen as problematic. And a couple of years ago, I wrote this book chapter This is not particularly connected to my research, but I just found it really fascinating and decided I was going to write a chapter about it. And it's about the idea of the female memoir. There's been a huge craze recently of kind of female comedians writing memoirs that are basically kind of feminist messages. But they're all kind of, wrapped up in stories about how they got cast on Saturday Night Live and things like that. But it's really interesting because the idea of being too funny is often a problem. And this is probably slightly autobiographical because I was also years ago told by a man that I was too funny. For context, I was breaking up with him in this conversation. It's possible his feelings were hurt. But he told me that I was too funny, too quick, and too clever. And I was like 24 at the time, so I was like, I know. But I think it's really telling that the woman who is too funny, too clever, too outspoken, just a bit too much. One of my friends years ago went for an academic job at a university that will remain nameless, and she didn't get the job, and her feedback was that she was too perfect. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a man being told that they are too perfect? Can you imagine a man being told that they're too funny? It's simply not a problem. So I also think the fact that the Barbie movie was written by women or co-written by a woman and had female writers and female producers was also, for a lot of people, quite problematic. And going back to this idea of autobiography, I teach a lot of women's autobiography and American literature, and I think it's hugely important because what autobiography and memoir, although memoir is a kind of more literary genre, what autobiography allows women to do and has allowed women to do is write themselves into the public record, write themselves into existence, put their voice in the public sphere, and that is hugely, hugely, hugely important. As Miller and Taylor kind of talk about here, they talk about the idea of genre as a basic resistance to patriarchal cultures that are so exclusive and excluding. And I'm so proud of the American women's autobiography that we have here at York St John, and I should really do a shout out to Fraser, who I know he's probably going to murder me for this, to Fraser Mann, who has co-taught American literature here with me for years, and it's a pleasure to teach with Fraser because he's basically finished the marking before it's been submitted. He's brilliant. And we decided right from day one that we were going to have a totally decolonised syllabus, and it was an absolute honour, really, to go back to Native American writing. That's Zit Carla in the top right-hand corner. Amazing woman, one of my real heroes, who in the early 20th century is a pioneer in fighting for Native American rights and writes incredible stories about life on the plains. We've also got Harriet Jacobs, a former enslaved woman who self-liberates and helps to turn the tide of the Civil War, helps to end slavery in the US. Mary Rowlandson, who is captured by Native Americans in the 17th century and writes the first captivity narrative in American history and starts a blockbuster genre that lasts for well over a century. And The Woman Warrior, which I still teach regularly and I love, is about Chinese American experience in the US. And I'm just really proud that we have this inclusive syllabus, and I remind myself that it's not true everywhere. And when we look at the US, the statistics on banned books are terrifying. It is truly terrifying. I must have taught easily over my 20 odd years of teaching probably 2/3 of these texts. I've taught many of them here. And the idea of anything that is about feminism, racism, queer theory, or indeed labour history being physically taken off bookshelves is absolutely terrifying to me. So how do we deal with this? Well, now more than ever, we have to keep reading. This is absolutely key. And I often go back to this wonderful quote from Kafka, and those of us who have taught in literature at York St John for a while will be haunted by the many lectures on Kafka we had to give over the years when he was a stalwart of our syllabus. But I love this quote from Kafka, poor Kafka, who talks about the experience of reading as something that almost has a physical impact on us. Reading is transformational. It does something to the individual. It makes you think, it makes you reassess. And we have to keep reminding ourselves about all of these books that we need to keep reading and thinking about. So I'm circling back now in these last sort of few minutes to book nerd Barbie. Here she is again. And I've just shared a couple of my favourite kind of quotations with you there. First from Roxane Gay, author of Bad Feminist, which is great if you haven't read it, and also the wonderful James Baldwin, great African-American activist from the 1960s. And what they're both advising us about there is how reading and engaging with literature is to be part of a community. It is to be part of a community, and it is to be part of a vital, vital conversation. And that is absolutely crucial, that we keep talking and we keep reading. I bet you thought I'd forgotten about biscuits. I didn't forget about biscuits. I'm a very big believer in biscuits, and I think most of my leadership philosophy is kind of based on carbs and sugar. And in the leadership teams that we have here at York St John, my senior academic leadership team, SALT as they are known, we have biscuits and cake at every humanities meeting, and I think there would be a riot now if I didn't bring them in. But I'm a big believer in it because I think it builds community. I think it helps in terms of making people feel safe and relaxed. And it means that we can have good conversations, and this is really important. And it is a bit of a standing joke now. The SALT biscuits, all of my SALT team are here tonight, by the way, because they are amazing. But this idea of kind of, I don't know if it's the Irish Catholic in me, but there's something kind of ecumenical about sharing these things together, and you can have a really effective conversation as you are eating custard creams. So I want to just circle back in these last few minutes again to Morrison. That kind of set of an intention, if you like, at the start of this lecture. This is my approach to teaching, to leadership. It's so important. And I hope that what I have said tonight might have served to remind everybody about the importance of having a voice, raising our voices, and of course the importance of reading. And I'm going to take you back one more time to Barbie and Ruth Handler, her creator, this famous quotation she has where she talks about Barbie as someone who is aspirational. Barbie always represented the fact that a woman has choices. And Barbie, I think, is popular partly because you get to choose the Barbie you want. You can be any type of Barbie. You can find that voice for Barbie. And when I decided, when I was writing this lecture, that I was going to try and use Barbie as a lens through which to think about some of these ideas, I began to buy second-hand Barbies. And I began to rehab them. And I began to give them clothes and brush their hair, give them some dignity. I found them from charity shops, online. It was enormously soothing. Did I do a photo shoot of my Barbies? Yes, I did. Maybe you've been thinking about the official Jurassic World tie-in Barbie outfit. Don't worry, because I bought it. This is Curvy Barbie. And I tried to get more kind of representative Barbies. I made a real effort to find Barbies with different skin colours and with different physical appearances. And here we have some great ones. This one, I think, is like Mafia Widow Barbie, Carrie Bradshaw Tribute Barbie, Gonna Sue You for Every Penny in the Divorce Court Barbie, and Femme Ken. Because there are some Kens in there as well, and that is very important. And I have to say a huge thank you to my brother Dom for their help with this, because Dom has been the creative director of a lot of the Barbie action and kept saying things to me like, "Oh my God, you've made her look basic." and there was some restyling that went on, is all I'll say. So I've tried not to be too basic. And I realised that it got out of hand, and I offer as proof this text to Professor Abby Curtis, where I recognise myself that things have got a bit much. So I wanted to end by reassuring you. Abby very kindly came around some of the charity shops for me and did check in to check I was still sane at very important moments. But I want to end by saying that the whole purpose of collecting these Barbies was to release them back into the wild. And I invite you at the end of this lecture to come and choose a Barbie and take her home with you, or a Ken. Yes.
Wow.
And you don't have to, there's no pressure. But if you would like a Barbie, if you've got a small person at home who would like a Barbie, maybe you would like a Barbie. But please take one, otherwise I'll put all of them in my office. So I also want to say a massive thank you, because I would not be here without the incredible kindness of my friends and family. So I want to say a huge, huge thank you to all of these people. And I know I've forgotten people as well, so please don't be offended if your name isn't on there, because I really feel the love in the room. So thank you. And I'm going to leave it there, but oh, sorry, that's my work site if anyone's interested in boring. And I'm going to pause there, but I am going to invite you to please take a barbie at the end of the night. Thank you.
So we have 5 to 10 minutes or so for some questions. I'm sure there's lots of stimulating questions after that fantastic lecture. So thank you, Anne-Marie, first. I have an iPad here in case anybody online wants to ask a question. We have a roving mic, so please just pop your hand up and we'll get the mic to you. Anybody want to go first?
Everybody's looking at Barbies.
Should I use a...
Do you want
I'll put that way.
We've just got a question here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
What is your favorite Barbie movie?
The Barbie movie? Yes. Sorry. I think the most recent one, there have been some kind of interesting early animated features. I think Barbie and the Nutcracker.
Oh, I know, those are my favorite.
Yeah, they're really interesting. I don't know how Mattel kind of gets away with it, to be honest. They must have amazing copyright law, because Barbie's just constantly inserting herself into other people's stories and narratives and like just tripping along. But yeah, I think it was interesting. I wasn't at all sure what to expect from the Barbie movie, but I enjoyed the kind of camp madness of it. And I think it was a real departure, I think, from what we'd seen previously from those animated versions of Barbie that were kind of very kind of straight-faced. So I enjoyed the kind of, breaking of the fourth wall and the kind of meta nature of the Barbie movie. Thank you.
They're making me nervous.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. And I was struck by the mix of joy and frustration, and the Toni Morrison quote, and that question of empowering other people. And I think about the pace of change, and I wonder from your experience, like if you could help me or all of us think about, like maybe that moment in your trajectory when you were able to start empowering people. I know that happens at all points and at all times, but like, do you have any advice for those of us who are seeking to do the same?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Nasa, thank you. I think the key thing to remember is that you don't have to be in a position of power to empower people. You don't have to wait till you get to a certain point in your career. You can help and empower people. And I think you're right about that mixture of joy and frustration. And I think the real key thing is just not to lose hope. And I think when we see things politically shifting to the right, on a global scale, right, not just in the US, it's very hard to kind of lose hope, essentially. And I think we always have to come back to kind of grassroots action in moments like this. And that's why I always go back to Toni. When in doubt, as a general life rule, go back to Toni Morrison, because you're not going to go too far wrong. But I think, that sense of just, an act of empowerment might be to sit and listen to someone for half an hour. It could literally be something like that. And I think in teaching, we're in hugely privileged positions. As you know yourself, as a teacher, there are those moments when you can literally see a light bulb go off for a student, and that's me, and that's why I'm in this job. That is why I'm doing it, because that is a privilege to be able to do that, and why I will always be so passionate about teaching and about education as a passport, which is something I often say. That was not a full answer to your question, but I hope it answered some of it.
So I'm going to take one question from a participant online, the fabulous Kimberly Campanillo.
Hello, Professor Campanello.
So she asks, what are your plans for the next phase of your research? Professor Evans, aka my mentor when I joined York St John in 2015.
Thank you, and hello Professor Campanello at home, thank you for that. I think the next phase of my research, my problem with research is always that I have about 1 million ideas, and I'm quite time poor. So at the moment I've got some very exciting things going on. I've got the First Ladies Project with Sarah Trott from American Studies, Liz Goodwin, who helpfully sat next to her, and I are doing a whole project about teaching and innovation in the humanities. We've also had a very interesting conversation about cookbooks and nostalgia. I think I've got loads of plans for the next 5 years. The problem is that I am interested in so many things, and probably what I need to do is to try and curb my interest in a few things. But I've got loads and loads of things that I want to write about. I also now want to write about Civil War nursing, Barbie. I've been thinking for a while about writing some kind of journal article about dolls in fiction, or when you have really weird dolls in fiction. The problem with that is that I'm really not good with horror. Genuinely, probably horror is the only genre I don't read because I genuinely get very scared. So I think I need to think about that. But yeah, I think my main plan for the next 5 years is to keep going, keep writing, keep thinking, keep having valuable conversations, and keep learning from colleagues and hearing about their research, because that is always incredibly valuable as well. So thank you, Professor Campanello.
One more question, Sharon.
It's a hard one, by the way.
Right, okay.
I'm just bring up, okay.
So teaching is activism. So apart from teaching, what is your most impactful, do you think, your most impactful activity, but not teaching?
Outside the classroom? Oh, that's a really good one. Do you mean in addition to going on marches and things like that?
No, that can be.
It could be that, yeah. I'm a very big believer in putting your money where your mouth is. So I'm a very big believer in showing up to stuff if something's happening, which is why I'm incredibly grateful that you've all shown up to try and I often say to students, vote with your feet. So I think that is, supporting marches, supporting special events, making sure that we have events for, the Trans Day of Visibility and things like that, making sure that there is representation, not where we're speaking for individuals, but where we are amplifying their voices. So I think that would be a key one that sort of takes place outside teaching. Most of my stuff has been in teaching through kind of widening participation that I did for a very long time and continue to do in different ways. But probably just showing up to stuff and making sure that things are on the radar, on agendas. Now that I do have that tiny bit of power that Toni Morrison talks about as a head of school, I can make sure that we are discussing all of those things. And as you know, in humanities, we're very good at discussing all of those things anyway. So I would say that kind of policy support in that way. That was a really thoughtful question. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen, mine's not a very thoughtful question. I just wanted to know what you think about Cindy.
So Cindy is the British knockoff version. Now, full disclosure, I did have a Cindy. I preferred my Barbie. I had hilariously business Barbie. Goodness knows what my parents were thinking. She had a pink calculator. I was the least interested child in a calculator ever. But I think I had a ballerina Barbie as well at one point. Cindy, I think, is quite interesting because her legacy has not lasted in the same way as Barbie, and partly I think that's because Mattel has amazing advertising and PR. So there's a lot of Cindy memorabilia online. When I was buying bundles of Barbies on Vinted, I had to do that intervention with myself. And sometimes people try to slip a Cindy in. Or occasionally an Elsa. Get the hell back to Arendelle. So actually, I can tell you, these are all genuine Mattel Barbies. And the way you know they're Mattel is that they have Mattel branded into their neck, and they also have, usually their neck, sometimes their back, but they also have their year of issue. So there are on this table here, some from the 90s, there are some quite old Barbies. The oldest one I found was from, I think, 1970. She's staying with me, I'm going to sort her a vintage outfit. And I also found one of the black Barbies from 1980, like one of the first ones that came out. So she's staying with me, she'll be debuting in my office at some point after Christmas. So I think Cindy is interesting. I think she made a lot of money for a lot of people for a short amount of time, but I think the interesting bit is the longevity of Barbie. Like, she's over 60, you know, so it's the way that they have built the kind of, I guess, the myth of Barbie. And the film is only going to add to that, isn't it? So thank you. A controversial question. I love
So Holly, last question, I think.
Okay. Oh, sorry, it's not a very serious question either. I was wondering, sort of confession time, if it's okay that my favourite thing, and I think a lot of people's favourite thing about the Barbie movie was Ken.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, there were aspects of Ken I also enjoyed. I think the way it was kind of framed, I think the way Ken was framed was really interesting, and it was genius casting, of course, with Ryan Gosling, genius casting. But I quite liked how the enemy was the patriarchy, and Ken kind of had to learn. But I also think that there's an incredible irony, as I said before, that so much attention has gone to Ken, when, as we know, he's just Ken. You know, he's just Peach, or whatever, whereas Barbie is everything. So I think that was almost perhaps an inevitable kind of outcome of the movie when you cast Ryan Gosling and have him do a kind of Gene Kelly tribute song in the middle of the film. Like, how can you not love that? I went to see the film with various people on the front row here, and I remember just crying with laughter at that moment. So I think it's fine, and I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all love Ken, apart from Alan. But everybody else loves Ken, and I think it's just one of those interesting things about Barbie culture that we can interrogate and think about. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with liking Ken.
Thank you. So unfortunately we are out of time for the main event, but we do have some drinks outside, I think, and a chance to carry on those conversations. Before we finish, we do have one more themed moment for the evening. So we can join you in thanking everybody for a superb